Episode 5, Divine Debate. Thor came to Storm's chambers the next morning, Asgardian morning, which Storm had learned operated on a 27-hour cycle that made her internal clock protest, carrying 2 goblets and an expression that suggested he'd spent the night reconsidering his initial hostility. "I brought mead," Thor said, holding up the goblets. It seemed diplomatic. Also, Sif suggested that if I continued treating you as an intruder rather than a guest, I would be proving myself unworthy of kingship through sheer rudeness. Her words, not mine. Storm accepted the goblet warily, sniffing the contents before taking a cautious sip. The liquid tasted like honey mixed with lightning, sweet but carrying an electrical charge that made her mutation respond with interest. "This is alcoholic." "Very," Thor confirmed, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight, despite being made from materials that probably shouldn't creak. "Asgardian mead is potent. Fair warning, it's designed for beings with enhanced physiology. Mortals who drink it typically regret the experience." "I'm not exactly a typical mortal," Storm replied, taking a longer drink and feeling the mead's warmth spread through her system without the disorientation alcohol usually caused. Her mutation's enhancement of her physiology apparently extended to processing Asgardian alcohol, though I'm also not a goddess, despite what your people seem to think. "But you were worshipped as one," Thor observed. Heimdall consulted Earth records. Apparently your divine exploits are documented extensively in Africa, where entire communities built shrines to honor the woman who brought rain during droughts and dispersed dangerous storms. You didn't just command weather, you used it to save people who saw you as their goddess. That is divine authority, regardless of what you call it. "Those people were desperate," Storm said, her voice carrying the weight of memories she'd spent years processing. "I was a child with powers I didn't understand, and they needed someone to believe in. I gave them rain because they were dying of thirst, not because I wanted worship. The fact that they built shrines was complicated. I accepted their reverence because refusing would have hurt them, but I never believed I was actually divine. I'm a mutant. My X gene produces weather manipulation abilities through biological processes, not through cosmic authority granted by creation itself." "And yet," Thor countered, "you command weather with precision I've rarely encountered. I've fought storm giants whose power dwarfs mine. I've witnessed Odin summon tempests that reshaped continents. But your control, the way you manipulate individual atmospheric elements rather than just generating overwhelming force, that suggests understanding beyond biology. That suggests connection to weather as fundamental force rather than just genetic advantage." Storm studied Thor over her goblet, reassessing the being she'd initially dismissed as privileged aristocrat playing at heroism. "You actually understand the difference between power and control, between generating storms and truly commanding them." "I've had 1,000 years to learn," Thor replied, "though I'll admit, most of that learning involved hitting things with Mjolnir until they stopped being problems. It's only recently, since joining the Avengers, since working alongside mortals like Captain America who achieve impossible things through skill rather than divine strength, that I've begun questioning whether my power was sufficient qualification for kingship. Your arrival suggests the answer might be no." "I don't want your throne," Storm said firmly. I didn't ask for this challenge. I don't even understand why your realm's magic decided my weather manipulation makes me your equal when we got our abilities through completely different methods." "Because," Thor said, setting down his goblet with the careful precision of someone choosing words that mattered, "the magic doesn't care about methods, it cares about results. You command weather with authority that rivals mine. You've been worshipped as a goddess by people who chose to see divinity in your actions. So you've used storms not just as weapons, but as tools of creation, bringing rain to feed crops, dispersing dangerous weather systems, protecting the vulnerable from atmospheric catastrophes. That is divine storm authority. That is what the ancient law was designed to test. Which storm wielder truly understands what it means to command weather not just as power, but as responsibility?" "Responsibility I learned through necessity," Storm replied. "I grew up on Cairo's streets, orphaned, starving, using my mutation just to survive. When my powers fully manifested, I could have taken whatever I wanted, used weather to destroy anyone who'd hurt me, to force the world to give me the comfort I'd never had. Instead, I used them to help people who were suffering the way I'd suffered. That wasn't divine authority. That was choosing not to become a monster despite having monstrous power." "That choice," Thor said quietly, "is precisely what makes you dangerous to Asgard's understanding of kingship. I was born to rule, trained from childhood to wield power as birthright. My authority comes from Odin's bloodline, from millennia of tradition that says some are born to command because the cosmos selected their lineage for greatness. You're suggesting that's insufficient. That true authority comes from choosing service over dominance, from earning worship rather than inheriting it. If you're right, now if the Tempest duel proves your philosophy superior to mine, then everything Asgard has believed about divine monarchy becomes questionable." Storm leaned forward, her dark eyes meeting Thor's blue ones with intensity that made the air between them crackle with electromagnetic potential. "Are you afraid you'll lose?" "I'm afraid," Thor admitted, "that I already have. Not the duel itself. We haven't begun the trials. But the philosophical challenge you represent. Now, I've spent 1,000 years believing I deserved to rule because I was Odin's son, because I was strong, because I commanded thunder as birthright. You've been here less than a day, and you're making me question whether any of that actually qualifies me for kingship. Whether being born to power is sufficient when others earned it through choices I never had to make." "Then maybe," Storm suggested, "this duel isn't about who's more powerful. Maybe it's about forcing you to prove you understand what divine authority actually means before Asgard gives you a throne that could be used for good or evil, depending on the wielder's character." "And if I can't prove that?" Thor asked. "Then maybe," Storm replied, "Asgard needs a different kind of king than the one you've been trained to be."